I can't imagine what it's like to be on these boats when the helicopters come down on the deck. Can you give us a sense just of what it's like to be the captain of one of these vessels when you see America coming in your rearview mirror? What do they do when they land on the boat?
So first thing, if you're that captain and you actually see the U.S. Coast Guard coming from behind you, you then see AC-130 gunships flying over your head, along with something called an P-8 Poseidon, which is a sub-hunter.
Yes, okay.
These are all going around you and then the U.K. is also involved.
So you're in a real busy space all of a sudden.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then all of a sudden now you are going to have a helicopter that's coming and you're having U.S. troops board your vessel to be able to take over. But they did it in a great way in terms of the title and authorities on how they actually did it.
Okay.
The Coast Guard being involved in this instead of U.S. Navy personnel boarding the boat allows it in terms of that law enforcement, the maritime law enforcement piece that's really going back into the sanction indictment for this.
And that sort of ties to what we saw in Venezuela, right? When we hear the administration talk about executing a law enforcement action. Can you just talk to us about how critical that difference is when we're talking about actually going out, seizing what it means for the implications for our military?
No, absolutely. So these were sanctioned vessels that dealt with black market oil, crude oil. And so as such, right, the difference between the Coast Guard and the Navy, if the Navy does it, it ends up having a much higher level escalation on the public stage. So the fact that the Coast Guard was the one that was following this vessel, they originally tried to board the vessel, a couple weeks ago, and then started following it, and they waited, the U.S. waited to board this until this point. Becomes key because it's not an act of war at that point in time. You are looking at it more in terms of the law enforcement side. The blockade stays in put. The skipper that was boarded a couple weeks ago, as well as then today, you've got the Marinera as well as the Sophia. So they're doing this under the law enforcement side. The Coast Guard is playing a pivotal role in this.
Really interesting. This video that we're showing on Bloomberg TV and on YouTube is wild, taken with night goggles, I guess, or night vision here, as you see them climbing the stairs up to the bridge of this ship. And you see right now, if you're watching, the helicopter coming down on the deck of this boat. There they are climbing the stairs. Colonel, did they knock or did they knock the door down?
Well, I think at this point in time, they're looking for rules of engagement were probably very clear before they actually boarded that boat. So it's probably a no-knock warrant.
A no-knock warrant
that allows them to be able to go in and be able to do that. They've already provided entry at that point in time. They're already on the vessel. So at that point in time, what is going to provide them with the most force protection to be able to, and they always do it with the least amount, right? Escalation of force. So they're going to start at that lower level. And if you're that captain on a vessel, I think at that point in time, you've been followed by the Coast Guard. You've got the gunships ahead. I don't think you're going to resist. Right.
Leading up to this, we saw what appeared to be an escalation by Russia, right? They had sent a submarine to escort one of these tankers. Does this action by the U.S. risk inflaming those tensions between the U.S. and Russia? What do those sorts of communications look like between Washington and the Kremlin? Are there communications?
There were, because Russia came and said that they were concerned about the fact that the Coast Guard was following along. But the U.S. comes in and talks about the fact this was a stateless vessel up until that point. This is not this is not a Russian flagged vessel. When they avoided when the Marinera, back then actually was called the Bella One.
Yes.
When the Bella One tried to get down to the blockade, when they turned around, they immediately started to paint a Russian flag on the side, and then they provided the registration paperwork to Russia. Now, Russia normally actually inspects and does formal pieces before they actually register a vessel and flag them underneath theirs. They did not do that in this case. So then when the Russian submarine is coming up, they're the ones who actually provided a Title 10 military action, if you will, compared to the U.S. Coast Guard Title 14 or under Title 18 under law enforcement authorities. Both of those. That escalation actually came from Russia. So I think when looking at the political calculus on that was, hey, look, we still boarded the vessel using our law enforcement authorities. But yes, the fact that the Russian was there did have to play into, okay, is the Russian submarine going to engage?
So what do we think about that? Do you mention that P-3 sub hunter? Do they bug out when they see hardware like that when the United States is around, or does that draw submarines to the scene?
Well, I think at that point in time, I don't know whether the indicators and warnings
Okay.
for that submarine knows that they're actually being
I see.
seen or watched
Wow.
or tracked
Yeah.
by a P-8 Poseidon. But those sub hunters do end up
P8,
playing
right. Got
a
it.
very critical role.